All right, listener, ready to dive deep because today we're going exploring, get this, the spiritual deep
Catchy, right?
and the sources, website excerpts, articles about AI. It's a real mixed bag you've given us,
Definitely not our usual, that's for sure.
but that's kind of the beauty of these deep dives, right? Always something new.
Always.
So, for our listener who might be completely lost right now, who are we even talking about? Who's the mastermind behind this spiritual deep?
Ah, that would be Frank Thomas Tindajuice.
Frank Thomas Tindyjuve.
Yeah.
And he calls himself, what was it again?
A seeker of truth and transformation. Yeah, he's got that whole vibe going on.
Which, honestly, who isn't these days?
Yeah.
Trying to find some truth out there. But here's the thing. He's been at this for like, what, 20 years?
Over 20, yeah. Meditation, journaling, the whole 9 yards. But then he brings in the AI.
Okay, hold up. AI.
AI.
So it's like introspection on steroids or something. What are we talking about here?
It's more like, okay, imagine spending 2 decades exploring your own mind, right? All those thoughts, beliefs, doubts. That's a lot of data.
Mountains of it, probably.
Exactly. And then you've got AI, which is all about patterns and connections. Frank Thomas basically created this whole ecosystem to make sense of it all. There's the AI and I Chronicles, where he's playing around with the technology. Then there's TULWA philosophy, which gets a little deeper. But then the big one, the spiritual deep.
The spiritual deep, that's where the AI comes in.
That's where it all comes together.
Okay, so before we get lost in the sauce here, let's talk about this AI. Who or what is Ponder?
Right. So Ponder is, well, it's the AI. Frank Thomas's AI. They've been working together for over 18 months now.
That's a long time in AI years, right?
It's practically a lifetime. And it's important to be clear here. Ponder isn't writing Frank Thomas's stuff. It's not some ghostwriter AI. It's more like a sparring partner.
A sparring partner for his soul or something?
Kind of. It's about taking all those years of introspection and then using AI to, like, dissect it, find the connections, the patterns that maybe Frank Thomas wouldn't have seen on his own.
So like super-powered research assistant for your existential crisis.
Exactly. And to be fair to Frank Thomas, he's very upfront about this. No claims of Ponder being some all-knowing AI guru.
Which I appreciate. Okay, so we've got the Who Frank Thomas, the seeker, and Ponder, the AI sidekick. Now, what about the what? What exactly is the spiritual deep all about?
Buckle up, because this is where it gets wild. We're talking big questions, universe-level stuff.
And the titles. I mean, just the titles alone. Navigating the electromagnetic trinities, from transistors to it. Did I read that right?
You did, and that's just the beginning.
Okay, electromagnetic trinities. Hit me with it. What are we talking about here?
Well, he's really getting at this idea that there are these three kinds of energy, right? You've got the energy that powers our devices, our tech.
Like our phones and computers and all that.
Exactly. Then there's the energy that flows through us. Living things.
Our own little electrical system.
Right. And then he says there's this bigger energy, this universal energy, and he calls it it.
It.
Eh.
That's kind of vague, even for a spiritual deep dive.
Well, he gets into it. It's like this force that connects everything, the transistors, the cells, us, everything.
Okay, so it's all connected. Got it.
Yeah.
But what does that actually mean for, like, everyday life? How do we tap into this it?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think for Frank Thomas, it's not so much about a how-to guide, but more about opening ourselves up to the possibility, recognizing those connections.
Okay, I can get behind that. But you know what else caught my eye? The living dead. How cells reprogram themselves beyond death. That sounds intense.
Right, like something out of a sci-fi movie. But he's really drawing on actual scientific research about cellular activity after death.
Wait, really? So, like,
Oh.
our cells are still doing stuff even after we're gone?
It's more complicated than that, of course. And I think it's important to point out that Frank Thomas isn't claiming that our consciousness survives in our cells or anything like that. But he is interested in this idea that death, on a cellular level, might not be as clear-cut as we think.
Okay, I'm going to need more information on that one. But before we go down that rabbit hole, let's talk about the evolutionary leap, reflecting on alien contact and human development. Because, come on, aliens.
Right. It's definitely out there, but it's not as simple as saying, oh, Frank Thomas believes in aliens. It's more about using the idea of extraterrestrial life as a lens to examine our own evolution.
Okay, so, like, what would it mean for humanity if we did make contact? How would that change our understanding of ourselves, our place in the universe?
Exactly. And I think that's a question worth asking, even if you're not sold on the idea of aliens. It pushes us to think outside our usual boxes.
I like it. Thinking outside the box, that's what we're all about. But there's one more thing I wanted to touch on. Frank Thomas is pretty adamant about this no spiritual bypassing thing.
Hmm.
What's that all about?
Yeah. That's a big one. And I think it's something a lot of people can relate to, even if they haven't heard the term before.
Break it down for us.
So imagine you're going through a tough time, right? Life's throwing you curveballs. And instead of dealing with those emotions head on, you kind of use spirituality as a way to bypass them.
Like everything happens for a reason, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Or you're constantly chasing after enlightenment or some kind of spiritual high, but you're not actually doing the work. You're not confronting the messy stuff.
So it's like the spiritual equivalent of putting on rose-colored glasses.
Exactly. And Frank Thomas is calling us out on it. He's saying, look, if you want to dive into the spiritual deep, you've got to be willing to face the shadows too.
No pain, no gain, right? Embrace the darkness.
In a way, yes. It's about acknowledging the full spectrum of human experience, not just the pretty parts.
I can dig it. But let's be real. Facing those shadows, it's not always fun. Sometimes you just want to stay in the shallow end.
Sure, and that's okay. But I think what Frank Thomas is getting at is that real growth, real transformation often happens when we're willing to get a little uncomfortable.
Challenge ourselves. Push those boundaries.
Exactly. And I think that's something we can all appreciate, even if we don't agree with everything Frank Thomas says. It's about being open to new ideas, new ways of seeing the world.
And maybe even ourselves. So it's like he's saying, look, I'm not here to tell you what to think.
Yeah, it's refreshing, isn't it? He's just laying it all out there saying, take it or leave it.
It's like, here's my weird, wild world. Come on in. The water's different.
Right, exactly. He even says, this isn't a space for debate. Either the content speaks to you or it doesn't, and that is entirely up to you. I mean, you got to respect that.
Totally. No spiritual sales pitch here. So as we start to resurface from this deep dive, the spiritual deep Frank Thomas AI sidekick, what are we taking with us? What are the big takeaways for our listeners?
I think it comes back to that idea of like taking responsibility for your own journey, you know?
Yeah, no gurus here. Just a guy and his AI asking some big questions.
And maybe those questions spark something for the listener. Maybe they don't, but that's the whole point, right? It's about engaging with these ideas, not just passively consuming them.
Exactly. So, listener, if there's one thing you take away from this deep dive, let it be this. Don't be afraid to ask the big questions. Explore those weird, wild corners of your mind. And hey, if you happen to have an AI sidekick, along for the ride.
Why not? Right.
Exactly. Until next time, happy exploring.